A little girl screamed, "Daddy, that's my brother!" The millionaire froze and collapsed in tears. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The night was drenched in rain, the kind that blurred the city lights into streaks of silver and blue. A storm had rolled over Westbridge Avenue, flooding the gutters, washing over the tires of passing cars. The wail of an ambulance echoed in the distance, mixing with the sound of thunder. On the corner near a diner's flickering neon sign, chaos unfolded. A sedan had spun out on the slick road, colliding with a guardrail. The metal screeched. The smell of gasoline filled the air. A little girl, no older than 6, stood in the rain, her small hands trembling as she looked at the wreck. Her mother's voice was somewhere behind her, muffled by the downpour. Paramedics rushed toward the car. Lights flashed red against the walls of nearby buildings. A tall man in a soaked business suit stood frozen on the sidewalk, water dripping from his hair. His name was Daniel Cross, a name that once belonged to magazine covers and charity galas. Tonight, however, he was just another man watching his world collapse. He had seen the accident happen. He had pulled over instinctively, sprinted through the storm, and reached for the door of the crushed car. But when his eyes met the child's, something inside him cracked. The girl's voice pierced through the thunder, high and trembling. "Daddy, that's my brother." For a moment, everything went still. The paramedics froze. Even the siren seemed to fade. Daniel blinked, confusion warring with disbelief. The little girl was pointing to the unconscious boy being lifted from the wreck. He looked about 8 years old, pale, his small hand hanging limp beside the stretcher. Daniel's breath caught. The boy's face, it was like looking into a mirror from 20 years ago. The same brown eyes, the same shape of jaw, the same small scar near the eyebrow. He felt his knees weaken. "What did you say?" he whispered, stepping closer, but his voice was lost in the storm. The girl's mother grabbed her shoulders, pulling her back, shielding her from the flashing lights. Daniel stumbled forward as the world tilted around him. The rain blurred his vision, but it was not the rain that burned his eyes. It was recognition, memory, regret, and something deeper, a truth clawing its way up from the dark corners of his past. His lips moved, but no sound came out. The boy was lifted into the ambulance. The doors slammed shut. Daniel took one step, then another, his heart pounding like the sirens. And then, under the rain and the chaos, his body gave out. The millionaire who once owned half the skyline fell to his knees on the wet asphalt, his hands covering his face as his voice broke into a sound that was half sob, half prayer. The crowd watched, silent, as Daniel Cross collapsed in tears, his name echoing across the night like a confession to the storm. The night the accident happened replayed over and over in Daniel Cross's mind, but as the rain faded into the quiet hum of dawn, his memory dragged him backward, 12 hours earlier, to the moment when the storm inside him had truly begun. It was a bright morning then, sunlight breaking across the glass towers of downtown Chicago. Daniel stood in his penthouse office on the 50th floor, staring at the city spread out beneath him like a kingdom he no longer wanted. The board meeting had just ended. His father's company, Crosstech Industries, had posted record profits again. Everyone congratulated him, yet he felt nothing. His assistant knocked gently on the glass door. "Sir, your sister called again," she said softly. Daniel's jaw tightened. "Tell her I am busy." The woman hesitated. She mentioned something about the foundation's orphan sponsorship files. His eyes flickered with annoyance. "I said I am busy." The door closed quietly, leaving him alone with the silence of his success. He turned toward the window, his reflection overlapping with the cityscape. A man in a $1,000 suit, polished shoes, expensive watch, but eyes that carried exhaustion instead of pride. For years, Daniel had told himself that loneliness was the price of control, that emotions were distractions for weaker men. But the past had a way of whispering even when you tried not to listen. A memory flickered, her face, her voice, the argument from 9 years ago. Julia. The woman who once loved him when he was just a dreamer with a broken-down car and a head full of plans. The woman who walked away, saying she could not raise a child alone while he chased ambition. He had convinced himself she lied about the pregnancy. It was easier to hate her than to wonder. He blinked, forcing the thought away. His phone buzzed on the desk, flashing a name that tightened his chest, Nathan Cross. His younger brother, and the one man he trusted least. Daniel swiped to answer. "What do you want, Nathan?" he said, his voice low. Nathan's tone carried that familiar mix of mockery and envy. "Relax, big brother. I just thought you should know, the charity audit you ignored has resurfaced. They are asking why the child sponsorship files disappeared." Daniel frowned. "What are you talking about? Ask your assistant. Or better yet, check the name Julia Monroe. Ring any bells?" Nathan laughed softly. "Guess not. Anyway, try not to make another scandal. The press loves a fallen hero." The line clicked dead. Julia Monroe. The name hit him like a forgotten melody. He sat down slowly, the air in the office suddenly too thin. Could it be the same Julia? After all these years? He opened his laptop, searching through the Foundation's records. And there it was, a sponsorship file for a boy named Ethan Monroe, age 8. The screen blurred. The photograph was black and white, taken for identification, but the child's eyes, they were his. The same deep brown, steady and unsure. His throat went dry. The clock on the wall ticked loudly. He closed the laptop and stood. Outside, the clouds were rolling in, thick and grey. He needed air. He needed distance. Within an hour, he was in his car, the silver sedan cutting through traffic as thunder began to rumble in the distance. The rain started as a drizzle and soon became a curtain. His thoughts spiraled faster than the windshield wipers could keep up. Why had Julia never told him? Why had he not tried harder to find her? Pride, ego, disbelief, all of it had built walls around him until they became a prison. Now, the name of a child, Ethan Monroe, was breaking them apart. He turned the radio off, the silence louder. Then the storm. He remembered the last time he saw Julia. They had been in a hospital waiting room after his father's heart attack. She had come to see him, trembling, saying she had news. He had not let her speak. He had walked away. The sound of the rain grew heavier, pounding on the roof. His phone buzzed again, but he ignored it. He could barely see the road ahead. Then, through the haze of water and headlights, he saw a car ahead of him, small, white, stranded on the side of the highway. Its hazard lights flickered weakly. Without thinking, he slowed down, pulling onto the shoulder. He saw a woman struggling to restart the engine, her hands gripping the wheel. Then he saw the child in the back seat. Something in his chest tightened. He stepped out of his car into the rain, waving his arm. "Hey, do you need help?" he shouted over the storm. The woman looked up. Even through the rain, even after 9 years, he recognized her. Julia. She froze, disbelief written across her face. "Daniel," she whispered, barely audible. A flash of lightning lit up the road, and for a second, they saw each other clearly, two people separated by time, regret, and something unfinished. He took a step forward, but at that moment, the sound of screeching tires ripped through the night. A delivery truck skidded from the opposite lane, its headlights blinding. Daniel did not think. He lunged forward, pulling Julia away from the car, his arm reaching for the back door handle. The impact came like thunder, metal colliding with metal. The car spun, the world blurred, and the next thing he heard was a scream, a small voice calling for help. The next memory after that would be the little girl's words piercing through the rain, words that would shatter everything he believed about his life. But 12 hours before that scream, Daniel Cross had already been a man haunted by the ghosts of his choices, driving through a storm he had made himself. The hospital corridors smelled faintly of disinfectant and coffee, the kind of scent that lingered even after the janitors were done with their rounds. It was just past midnight, and the rain outside still pressed against the tall windows in heavy waves. Julia Monroe sat in the waiting area of the Westbridge General Hospital, her hands clasped so tightly that her knuckles had turned pale. The nurses had taken Ethan into emergency care 30 minutes earlier, and every tick of the wall clock felt like a punch to her chest. Across the hall, Daniel Cross stood against the wall, his shirt soaked through, streaks of dried rainwater on his face, and eyes that refused to blink. He had been questioned by the police about the accident, about how he happened to be there, but the words barely made sense to him. He was replaying the crash again and again, the flash of headlights, the small hand reaching through shattered glass, and the sound of that voice in the rain. "Daddy, that's my brother." The nurse called out Julia's name, and both of them turned instinctively. Julia rushed forward. "How is he?" she asked, her voice trembling. The nurse gave a gentle nod. "He is stable. Some bruising, a mild concussion, but he is lucky. We have moved him to observation for the night." Julia exhaled, her knees almost giving way. The nurse hesitated, looking between her and Daniel. "You are his family." Julia nodded quickly, then paused when she noticed the nurse's curious glance at Daniel. "He is a friend," Julia said quietly. The nurse gave a polite smile and left. Julia turned to Daniel, her expression wary, defensive. "You should not be here," she said, her tone low but firm. "You saved our lives." "Thank you. But that is all." Daniel swallowed hard. "Julia, I know," she interrupted, shaking her head. "You do not get to say my name like that. Not after 9 years." Her voice cracked, and she turned away, pressing her hand to her forehead. "What are you doing here, Daniel?" He looked down, his shoes leaving faint wet marks on the tile. "I did not know it was you. I was driving, I saw the car, and what?" she snapped softly. "You thought you could play hero? Fix something for once." She laughed bitterly, though her eyes were glistening. "You were always good at arriving too late." Daniel said nothing. The storm outside rattled the windows. He finally took a step closer. "Julia, I did not know about him," he said. "Ethan. You never told me." She turned sharply, her face pale with anger and disbelief. "Do you really think I did not try? I wrote to you, Daniel. Twice. The first letter came back unopened. The second one, your assistant returned it with a note that you were too busy for personal matters." Her voice shook. "I was 24, scared, working double shifts, and I realized that you had already chosen your world over me." The words cut deeper than any accusation he had ever heard. Daniel felt his throat tighten, the truth weighing on him like a stone. "I was wrong," he whispered. "I was angry, and I believed lies that I should have questioned. I thought you left to trap me." Julia's eyes filled with tears she did not want to shed. "You think I wanted this life? You think raising a child alone was some grand revenge?" She laughed quietly, shaking her head. "You were the only person I ever loved, Daniel. But love does not feed a baby, and love does not pay rent." Daniel tried to speak, but his voice broke. "I saw his file today. Ethan Monroe. I did not know until then. I swear." Julia's shoulders stiffened. "You have no right to swear anything. He has a life now. He is happy, he is cared for. He does not need your name." The nurse reappeared at the corner of the hallway. "Ms. Monroe, your son is awake." Julia's heart leapt. She brushed past Daniel, but before she could enter the room, she turned back, her voice low. "If you care about him, do not destroy what peace he has left." She disappeared through the doorway. Daniel stood still, watching the door close behind her. Through the small glass window, he could see Ethan sitting up in bed and 4-line in his arm, blinking at the light. The boy's face was pale but calm. Julia sat beside him, holding his hand, her voice soft, soothing. The sight hit Daniel like a blow to the heart. That was his son. His child. His blood. Every instinct told him to walk away, to respect Julia's wish. But something stronger kept him rooted to the spot, a feeling that the universe had given him one final chance to be human again. He waited until the lights dimmed in the ward, then walked down the hall to the chapel on the hospital's lower floor. It was empty, dimly lit by candles, the air heavy with silence. He sat in the last pew, his hands clasped tightly. For the first time in years, he whispered words he had forgotten how to say. "If there is still time," he said softly, "let me do one thing right." His voice broke. "Please." He stayed there until dawn broke across the hospital's windows. When he stepped outside, the storm had ended. The streets glistened under the morning sun. In the distance, the world looked clean again, as if the night's chaos had washed away something old. But Daniel knew better. Some storms only moved from the sky to the heart, waiting for the courage to face them. The following morning, sunlight filtered through the hospital blinds, casting pale stripes across the walls. The chaos of the night before had faded into the soft rhythm of beeping monitors and quiet footsteps in the hallway. Julia Monroe sat beside Ethan's bed, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. The boy was still weak, but the color had returned to his cheeks. "How are you feeling, sweetheart?" she asked softly. Ethan smiled faintly. "Like I got hit by a truck," he whispered, and Julia's heart ached at how calmly he said it. She kissed the top of his head. "That is not funny, mister." "But I am okay, right?" he asked, eyes searching hers for reassurance. Julia nodded quickly. "You are more than okay. You scared me, that is all." Ethan's gaze wandered to the small plastic wristband on his arm. "Mom, who was that man? The one in the hallway? He looked like he knew you." Julia froze for a moment, then forced a smile. "Just someone who helped us, honey. We were lucky he was there." Ethan studied her expression, but he had his mother's instincts and let the question go. "Can I have pancakes when we get home?" he asked, his voice already brighter. Julia laughed softly, grateful for his simplicity. "You can have as many pancakes as you want." Outside the room, Daniel Cross watched through the small glass window. His eyes were tired, but something softer had taken root in them, a fragile hope he did not yet dare to name. He had been at the hospital all night, sitting in the chapel, replaying every word Julia had said. He knew he had no right to be near them, yet he could not bring himself to leave. A nurse passed by, glancing at him with recognition. "Mr. Cross," she said, her tone polite but hesitant. "The doctor wanted to thank you for what you did last night. It could have been much worse." Daniel nodded faintly. "How long will they keep him here?" "Maybe 1 or 2 days for observation," she said. "They are both lucky." As she walked away, Daniel turned back to the window. Inside, Julia was adjusting Ethan's blanket, smiling at something he said. The sight stirred something deep within him, a warmth he had not felt in years. Later that morning, he went to the hospital cafeteria and bought a cup of black coffee, sitting alone by the window overlooking the parking lot. His assistant had called 3 times already, and his phone buzzed again, flashing the name Nathan. He ignored it. The world he came from, the boardrooms, the investors, the endless cycle of numbers, felt distant, almost unreal now. What mattered sat 2 floors above him, behind a hospital door marked pediatrics. He stared at the coffee, his reflection faint on its surface. For the first time in his adult life, Daniel Cross did not know what to do next. Around noon, Julia came down to sign discharge paperwork. She stopped when she saw him. Their eyes met across the cafeteria, and for a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, she walked over. "You are still here," she said quietly. Daniel stood, unsure whether to smile. "I wanted to make sure you both were all right." Julia crossed her arms, her expression cautious but less sharp than the night before. You should be at work. I read enough headlines to know that Daniel Cross does not miss Mondays. He gave a tired half smile. Maybe he should have missed a few. There was silence, filled only by the hum of vending machines. Julia sighed, glancing out the window. Ethan will be fine. We are going home tomorrow. Daniel hesitated. Julia, I am not asking for forgiveness. I just want to understand what happened to you, to him. I did not know. And I cannot undo the past, but if there is anything I can do now, do not, she interrupted gently, but her voice lacked anger this time. Do not make promises you might not keep. He has everything he needs. I built that life for him. Alone. Daniel nodded slowly. I believe you. But please, let me help in some way. Julia studied him for a long time. Help? How? With money? With guilt? No, he said, his voice steady. With presence. With time. Julia's eyes softened just slightly before she turned away. I do not know if that is something you can give. She started to walk off, then paused. You were there when it mattered. Maybe that is enough for now. When she was gone, Daniel sank back into his seat. He stayed in the cafeteria for a while, staring out the window as a family crossed the parking lot, a father carrying his little girl, a mother holding their son's hand. It was such a simple image, yet it hit him harder than any corporate victory ever had. By evening, he went home. His penthouse felt emptier than usual, the city lights spilling through the glass like ghosts. He walked past the awards and framed newspaper covers on his walls, all meaningless now. On the desk near his bed, he placed the small bracelet he had found the night before, Ethan's bracelet, engraved with the letters EJ. He ran his thumb over it, remembering the way the boy's fingers had curled in sleep. His phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Nathan. The press got wind of the accident. Call me before they do. Daniel switched off the phone. He poured himself a glass of water, sat down on the edge of the bed, and whispered, not this time. Somewhere in the quiet of the city, thunder rumbled faintly in the distance, as if reminding him that storms never truly ended, they only moved on. But for the first time, Daniel Cross wanted to face this one head-on. He had found something worth being vulnerable for again, even if it broke him in the process. The next day, the sun rose over Westbridge with a faint warmth, as if the world itself was trying to apologize for the storm that had shaken it. Julia Monroe guided Ethan carefully out of the hospital doors, holding his small hand as he squinted at the morning light. He still wore a bandage on his forehead, but his spirit seemed brighter. Can we stop for pancakes on the way home? He asked with hopeful eyes. Julia smiled. You never forget a promise, do you? A familiar voice came from behind them. I know a place that makes the best pancakes in the city. Julia turned. Daniel Cross stood by the parking lot, dressed simply in jeans and a dark shirt, holding a takeout cup of coffee. He looked different, less polished, more human. Ethan's face lit up. Hey, it's the man who helped us. Julia hesitated, her instinct torn between caution and gratitude. Daniel knelt slightly, meeting Ethan's eyes. How are you feeling, buddy? Better, Ethan said proudly. Mom says I'm strong like her. Daniel chuckled softly. I can see that. Julia cleared her throat. We were just leaving, Daniel. He nodded. I figured. I just wanted to make sure you both got home safely. Julia studied him, sensing the sincerity in his tone. You do not have to do that. I know, he said quietly. But I want to. Against her better judgment, she allowed it. Daniel followed them to her old sedan, helping load Ethan's small bag into the trunk. The drive through the city was quiet, filled with the sounds of tires on wet pavement and a faint melody from the car's radio. Ethan sat in the back seat, humming softly, clutching his stuffed bear. Julia gripped the steering wheel, feeling the weight of everything unsaid between her and the man beside her. Daniel glanced at her once. He is a great kid. He is my whole life, Julia replied softly. He looks like you, Daniel said before he could stop himself. She exhaled. Do not start. I am not trying to make this harder, he said quickly. It is just, seeing him, it changes things. Julia's gaze stayed on the road. For you, maybe. For me, it just reminds me how hard it was. She parked in front of her small brick apartment building, tucked between a laundromat and a grocery store. Daniel followed her up the stairs, carrying Ethan's small backpack. Inside, the apartment was neat but modest, a few children's drawings taped to the refrigerator, a second-hand couch, and the faint smell of lavender from a candle on the windowsill. Ethan ran to his room to show his toy cars. Julia stood by the door, crossing her arms. You have seen where we live. Now you can stop worrying. Daniel looked around quietly. You built a good home, Julia. I built a life, she corrected. One that did not depend on anyone walking away. Daniel nodded slowly, accepting the truth behind her words. I deserve that, he admitted. But let me help you. Now, not with money, not with power. Just help. Julia shook her head. You cannot just step back in and expect it to make sense. I am not asking for that, he said. I just want to earn a place, even if it is small. Let me drive him to school sometimes. Let me be there if he ever needs someone. Julia looked away, her voice quieter. What would you tell him if he asks who you are? Daniel hesitated. I do not know yet. Then think about it, she said. Because once you tell him, you cannot take it back. Before Daniel could answer, Ethan came running out with a drawing in his hand. Look! I made this in the hospital. He held up a crayon sketch, 3 stick figures holding hands under a big yellow sun. That is you, Mom, that is me, and that is the man who saved us. Julia's breath caught. Daniel stared at the paper, his throat tightening. The innocence of it hit harder than any confrontation. You have a good artist here, he said softly. You can keep it, Ethan said proudly. So you remember me. Daniel took the drawing gently, his voice barely a whisper. I will. As the afternoon light filled the room, Julia stood silent, watching him fold the paper carefully and slip it into his coat pocket. There was something in his eyes she had not seen before, not arrogance, not regret, but humility. He turned toward her. Thank you for letting me see him, he said. You did not have to. No, she replied quietly. But maybe he needed it. Daniel left soon after, walking down the narrow street with his hands in his pockets. The drawing pressed against his chest felt heavier than all his wealth combined. He passed by a playground where a father was pushing his daughter on a swing, her laughter bright against the afternoon air. He stopped for a moment, watching, then whispered, someday. That night, back in his penthouse, Daniel placed the drawing on his desk beside the small bracelet engraved with the letters EJ. He looked out over the glowing city and finally understood that money could build towers but not bridges. He sat down, opened his laptop, and searched for something he had never dared to before, how to apply for legal parental acknowledgement. His finger hovered over the keyboard, trembling. He was not sure where this would lead or if Julia would ever let him in fully, but for the first time, Daniel Cross was ready to fight for something real, something that could not be bought. And somewhere across town, as Julia tucked Ethan into bed, the little boy smiled in his sleep, his hand resting on the edge of his pillow, unaware that his world was about to change again. 2 days later, the morning air carried the crisp chill of early autumn. The city moved as if nothing had happened, but for Daniel Cross, every minute felt heavier than the last. He had spent the last 48 hours thinking about Julia and Ethan, about the drawing folded on his desk, and about the chance he might never have again if he stayed silent. He stood before the mirror, adjusting his collar, realizing for the first time how strange it felt to dress for something other than business. He was not going to a meeting, not to a boardroom, he was going to face the life he once walked away from. Downstairs, his driver waited, but Daniel waved him off and took the subway instead. He wanted to remember what it felt like to be part of the world, not above it. The train rumbled beneath the city, filled with the hum of conversation and the faint scent of coffee. He watched people, parents holding their children, tired workers reading newspapers, and for once, he envied them. Ordinary love, ordinary life. That was something he had never allowed himself. When he reached the West End, he climbed the stairs and walked the few blocks to Julia's apartment. He stopped in front of a small flower shop on the corner and bought a single sunflower. It reminded him of her, the way she used to smile in college when she wore that yellow scarf, the way she said sunlight made her feel brave. By the time he reached her building, he almost turned back twice. But then the door opened, and Ethan stepped out with his backpack, humming a tune. Julia followed, locking the door behind them. She looked tired but peaceful. When she saw Daniel, she froze. "You again," she said, though her tone was not unkind. Ethan's face lit up. "Hi, mister." Daniel knelt, handing him the sunflower. "For your mom," he said. The boy grinned and took it eagerly. "Thanks." Julia looked down at the flower, then at Daniel. "You really do not know when to quit, do you?" she asked softly. Daniel smiled faintly. "Not this time." They walked together toward the street. Julia's car was still in the repair shop, so she and Ethan were taking the bus. Daniel followed at a respectful distance. When the bus arrived, Julia hesitated, then gestured to the empty seat beside her. "You might as well," she said quietly. Daniel sat down, his hands resting on his knees. Ethan pressed his face to the window, pointing out every dog and passing car. Daniel found himself smiling at the small details, the way Ethan's hair stuck up in the back, the way Julia automatically fixed his jacket when he leaned too close to the window. They got off near Maple Elementary, a modest school surrounded by tall oak trees. The front gate was bustling with parents and children. Daniel stopped a few feet away as Julia crouched to straighten Ethan's backpack. "Be good," she said. "And remember, no running in the halls." Ethan nodded solemnly, then leaned forward to whisper something in her ear. She laughed and kissed his cheek. "Go on." As the boy ran off to join his classmates, Daniel's chest tightened. "He is amazing," he said softly. "He is my everything," Julia replied. Then she looked at him, her voice more gentle now. "You should not come here often. People talk, and I do not want him confused." Daniel nodded, understanding. "I just wanted to see him start his day once. To know he is safe." Julia studied him for a long moment. "You look different," she said finally. "Less like a headline, more like you." He smiled faintly. "Maybe I am trying to remember who that is." The wind picked up, carrying the sound of children laughing. For a few moments, they stood in silence. Then Julia glanced at her watch. "I have to get to work." "At the hospital?" he asked. She nodded. "Double shift today." "They are short-staffed again." Daniel hesitated, then said, "Let me give you a ride tonight. It is late, and the buses are not safe after dark." She opened her mouth to protest, then stopped. "All right. But just tonight." When she left for the hospital that evening, Daniel was there, waiting outside her building in a modest sedan, not one of his usual luxury cars. The ride was quiet at first, filled with the hum of the city. After a while, Julia broke the silence. "You really are trying, aren't you?" Daniel glanced at her. "I am. I do not know if it will ever be enough, but I am." She nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. When they reached the hospital, she turned to him before getting out. "He has your eyes," she said softly, then walked inside without looking back. Daniel sat there for a long time, the words echoing in his head. That night, he drove home with a feeling he could not name. It was not victory, not redemption, just the fragile hope of something unfinished finding its way forward. In his penthouse, he placed the sunflower in a glass of water beside the drawing and the bracelet. The city lights glimmered outside, but for once, he did not feel alone. Somewhere across town, Julia checked her phone during her break. There was a message waiting, simple and unexpected. "Thank you for today. I will wait as long as it takes." She stared at the screen for a long time before typing a single reply. "Do not make me regret believing that." As the clock struck midnight, the storm that had once torn their lives apart seemed to have quieted, leaving behind not silence, but a beginning. The next week unfolded quietly, like the calm that settles after a storm. Daniel Cross began finding reasons to be near the small corner of the city that Julia and Ethan called home. He would pass by the elementary school in the morning on his way to the office, pretending it was coincidence, though deep down he knew it was not. He had never thought he could be content watching life move around him instead of controlling it. Yet here he was, standing by the old oak tree near Maple Elementary, seeing Ethan chase his friends on the playground, his laughter floating across the crisp autumn air. Julia had started to soften, not entirely, but enough that she no longer flinched when she saw him. They had fallen into a quiet rhythm, an unspoken truce built on the fragile promise of change. Every evening, when her shift ended at the hospital, Daniel would be there. Sometimes he drove her home, sometimes he just waited to make sure she got into the building safely. He never pushed, never demanded more than what she was willing to give. One afternoon, while Julia was sorting medical charts at the nurse's station, one of her co-workers, Clara, leaned over. "Hey, that guy who drops you off, he looks familiar," she said with a teasing smile. Julia hesitated. "He is just an old friend. He drives a car that probably costs more than this hospital," Clara said, laughing. "If that is just a friend, I cannot imagine what your exes look like." Julia smiled faintly but did not answer. When her shift ended that night, Daniel was waiting again, leaning against his car with a paper bag in hand. "You did not eat lunch," he said. "You called the hospital?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "No," he said, holding up his hands. "I guessed. You always skip meals when you are stressed." She sighed, but her lips curved slightly. "You still remember that?" "I remember everything," he said quietly. Inside the bag was soup from the diner they used to go to years ago, the one with the neon sign shaped like a coffee cup. The first spoonful brought back memories she had tried hard to bury, college nights, laughter over shared milkshakes, dreams that once felt possible. For a moment, she looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the CEO, not the man who left, but the boy she had loved. "You are making this complicated," she whispered. Daniel shook his head. "No, Julia. It already was." The next morning, a knock came at her door. It was Ethan's day off school for teacher meetings, and Julia had been worrying about how to manage her hospital shift. When she opened the door, Daniel stood there, holding 2 tickets. "There is a children's science exhibit downtown," he said. "I thought maybe I could take him for the day. You would have time to work without worrying." Julia hesitated. "He barely knows you." "Then maybe this is how he can start," Daniel said gently. Ethan peeked from behind his mother, his face bright with curiosity. "Can we go, Mom? Please?" Julia looked between them, torn. "All right," she said finally. "But stay in public places, and call me if anything happens." Daniel smiled, relieved. "You have my word." The day became something Daniel would never forget. He and Ethan explored the science museum, laughing at the interactive exhibits. Ethan's excitement was boundless. His questions endless. When they stopped for lunch at a nearby park, Ethan showed him a small bracelet he always wore on his wrist, the same one Daniel had found the night of the accident. "My mom says it was a gift when I was born," Ethan said proudly. "It has my initials, EJ." Daniel's throat tightened. "That is a good bracelet," he said, his voice soft. "You should take care of it." "I will," Ethan said, grinning. "You sound like my mom." "She is smart," Daniel replied. "You should listen to her." When they returned that evening, Julia was waiting by the window, her nerves wound tight until she saw them walking up the steps. Ethan burst through the door, talking a mile a minute about robots, rockets, and a dinosaur fossil as big as their car. Julia met Daniel's eyes and saw something she had not expected: gentleness. "Thank you," she said quietly. "He needed a good day." "So did I," Daniel admitted. Later, after Ethan went to bed, Julia walked Daniel to the door. "You are good with him," she said. "I did not expect that." "He deserves more than I ever gave," Daniel said. "You both do." For a moment, they stood in silence, the kind filled with meaning too delicate to name. Then Julia said softly, "Whatever this is, Daniel, do not hurt him. He is just a boy." "I will not," Daniel said, and he meant it. When he left that night, the air felt lighter somehow, and Julia found herself standing at the window longer than she meant to, watching his car disappear down the street. In his own apartment, Daniel placed a new photograph on his desk, Ethan laughing beneath the museum's giant model of Saturn, sunlight caught in his hair. For the first time in years, Daniel felt peace, fragile but real. Yet beneath that peace was something else, something he could not ignore: the quiet pull of truth. The DNA test kit he had ordered sat unopened beside the photo, waiting for a decision that would change everything. Daniel stared at it, torn between fear and hope. He whispered to himself, "He deserves to know." Outside, the city lights flickered like distant stars, unaware that for one man, a new kind of storm was already gathering. That night, Daniel cross-sat in his study long after midnight, staring at the unopened DNA test kit. On his desk, the city outside glowed faintly beneath the autumn fog, its skyline shimmering like a promise he no longer trusted. He turned the small box over in his hands again and again, his heart beat loud in the silence. For days he had tried to convince himself that love was enough, that he did not need proof. But the truth was not just about him, it was about Ethan, about Julia, about the 9 lost years between them. With a quiet exhale, he opened the box. The sterile packaging gleamed under the lamplight. He read the instructions carefully, every word sinking in. He would need a small sample, discreet and simple. He thought of the drawing Ethan had given him, still pinned above his desk, and then of the bracelet, the tiny band of silver with the letters EJ. The boy had left it behind once when Daniel dropped him off, and Julia had told him to return it later. That memory stirred something, a way forward he was not proud of but could not ignore. The next afternoon, Daniel stopped by Julia's apartment to return the bracelet. Ethan ran to the door, laughing. "Hey, it's you again," he said. Daniel smiled, holding out the small piece of jewelry. "You forgot this." "Oh, thanks," Ethan said, slipping it on. Julia appeared behind him, wiping her hands on a kitchen towel. "You did not have to come all the way for that." "I wanted to," Daniel replied simply. Julia hesitated, then motioned toward the living room. "Ethan, why don't you show Daniel your new drawing while I finish dinner?" Ethan darted off, pulling Daniel with him. The boy's laughter filled the small apartment like sunlight, and for a brief moment, Daniel forgot the reason he had come. But later, as Julia set plates on the table and Ethan ran to wash his hands, Daniel saw the boy's hairbrush resting on the counter. His hand trembled as he reached for it, plucking a single strand that had caught in the bristles. He hid it quickly in a folded napkin and slipped it into his pocket. Guilt pressed heavy on his chest, but he told himself it was not betrayal, it was truth-seeking. When dinner ended, Julia thanked him for coming, and he walked out into the cool night air, the weight of the secret sample burning in his hand. The next morning, he mailed the test. Days passed. He buried himself in work, attending meetings he could barely focus on, his thoughts constantly returning to that small envelope traveling somewhere through the postal system. Each time his phone buzzed, his pulse jumped. Meanwhile, Julia noticed subtle changes in him. When he picked Ethan up one afternoon, his smile seemed thinner, his eyes more distant. "Are you all right?" she asked. "You seem distracted." "Just work," he said quickly. "Nothing to worry about." She did not believe him, but she let it go. That evening, she sat with Ethan on the couch, helping him with homework. He was learning about family trees and had drawn one on a sheet of paper. "Mom," he said suddenly, "how come my tree only has one branch?" Julia blinked. "What do you mean?" "There's you and me," Ethan said, pointing at the paper. "But what about my dad?" Julia froze. The air thickened between them. She had practiced this conversation in her head for years but never found the right words. "Your dad," she said softly, "was someone I knew a long time ago." He was not ready to be a dad then. Ethan's brows furrowed. "Do I look like him?" Julia smiled faintly. "A little too much sometimes." The boy seemed to think for a moment, then shrugged. "It's okay. I have you." Julia kissed his forehead, her heart both breaking and healing in the same breath. Across town, Daniel sat alone in his office when the email finally arrived. The subject line read, "DNA analysis results, confidential." He stared at it for a long time before clicking. The document opened, and his breath caught. 99.9% probability. Ethan Monroe was his biological son. His hand shook so badly that he almost dropped the phone. The weight of 9 years collapsed into a single truth. He had a son. His son. The tears came before he could stop them. For so long, he had built his world on control, on numbers and logic, but this shattered all of it. He leaned back in his chair, whispering to the empty room, "I am so sorry, Julia." Later that night, he drove aimlessly through the city, the test result lying on the passenger seat. He stopped outside Julia's building but could not bring himself to go in. The light in her window was still on. He could see her silhouette, sitting beside Ethan as they read together. It was a picture of peace he did not want to destroy. Yet keeping the truth from them felt equally wrong. For the first time in his life, Daniel Cross felt powerless. He sat there until the streetlights dimmed with dawn, whispering a promise to the rising sun. "Tomorrow," he said softly. "Tomorrow I will tell her." Inside, Julia looked out the window for a fleeting moment, sensing something in the stillness. She pulled the curtains closed, unaware that the truth waiting outside her door would soon unravel everything she thought she had left under control. The morning after Daniel Cross received the DNA results, the world felt different, as if the air itself carried a new kind of gravity. He barely slept, pacing across his apartment with the printed report in his hand. Every line burned into his mind, every number a confirmation of what his heart already knew. Ethan was his son. The truth was no longer a possibility, it was a fact. And now came the hardest part, telling Julia. He rehearsed what he would say, but every version sounded wrong. He had no right to demand anything, yet he also could not stay silent. By the time the sun climbed above the skyline, Daniel had made his decision. He would go to her, not as the man she once loved, not as the millionaire, but as a father asking for forgiveness. He folded the paper carefully, slipped it into an envelope, and left his apartment. Across town, Julia was getting Ethan ready for school. The smell of toast and coffee filled their small kitchen. "Mom, can I bring my rocket to show and tell?" Ethan asked, his mouth half full of cereal. "If you promise not to launch it in the classroom," she said, laughing. "I promise," he grinned. As they walked toward the school, Julia's thoughts were lighter than they had been in years. Daniel had been careful with his boundaries lately, more considerate, less like the man who once lived for power. She could not deny that something in him had changed. Yet deep down, she was afraid of that change too. It stirred memories she had worked hard to silence. After dropping Ethan off, she turned and almost collided with Daniel. "You scared me," she said, startled. He looked tired, like he had not slept. "Julia. I need to talk to you," he said quietly. "Please. It is important." She studied him, noticing the seriousness in his tone. "All right. 5 minutes." They walked to a nearby park, empty except for a few pigeons pecking at crumbs near the benches. The morning air was cool, carrying the faint sound of children laughing from the schoolyard. Daniel handed her the envelope. "What is this?" she asked. "The truth," he said. "I had a DNA test done." Julia froze, her breath catching. "You did what?" "I needed to know," he said, his voice shaking. "Julia, I swear, I did not mean to go behind your back. But I could not keep pretending. I had to be sure." Her hands trembled as she opened the envelope. Her eye scanned the first few lines, and then she stopped. 99.9%. She looked up at him, tears welling in her eyes. "You tested my child without my permission," she whispered. "You had no right." "You are right," Daniel said quickly. "I crossed a line. But Julia, please, look at me. He is my son. I had to know because I cannot lose him again. I lost both of you once, and I will not let my pride steal that chance again." Julia's anger burned hot and sharp. "You think this is about pride? You think you can just walk in with your tests and your money and rewrite history?" Her voice broke. "You were not there, Daniel. You did not hold him when he was sick or when he cried for a father he never knew. You do not get to claim him because a piece of paper says so." Daniel took a step closer, but she stepped back. "I am not claiming him," he said softly. "I am asking for a chance to earn him." Julia turned away, pressing a hand to her mouth. "You should have trusted me," she whispered. "You should have just asked." "I was afraid you would say no," he said. "And you would have been right to. I needed something real to hold on to. Something that told me I still have a place in this world." Julia looked at him, and for a moment, she saw not the powerful CEO but the man who once drew plans for their future on napkins at diners, the man who once promised her forever. Her anger faltered, replaced by something more painful, understanding. "You cannot fix the past," she said quietly. "No," he agreed, "but maybe I can start a new one." They stood there in silence, the sound of the wind rustling through the trees around them. Finally, Julia handed the paper back. "I do not know what to do with this," she said. "Neither do I," Daniel admitted. "But I am here, Julia. For him. For you. Whatever it takes." She nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. "I need time." "You can have all the time you need," he said. "Just, please do not shut me out." When she walked away, Daniel stayed behind on the park bench, staring at the crumpled leaves beneath his shoes. For the first time in his life, he realized that truth alone was not enough, it needed grace, patience, and forgiveness. Across the street, Julia stopped for a moment before crossing, her heart pounding. She looked down at the report still in her hand, the numbers blurring through her tears. She wanted to throw it away, to erase the intrusion, but something inside her stopped her. She folded the paper and slipped it into her bag. Later that evening, as she tucked Ethan into bed, he asked, "Mom, why do you look sad?" Julia smiled faintly. "Just tired, honey. Go to sleep." But as she sat beside him, watching his small hand resting on the blanket, she whispered to herself, "Your father loves you. He always did. He just did not know how." Outside, under the quiet city sky, Daniel looked up at the same stars, making a silent vow. No more lies. No more running. Whatever came next, he would face it, with truth, no matter how much it hurt. For the next few days, Julia Monroe tried to carry on with her normal routine, but the weight of the truth pressed on her like an invisible hand. Every time she looked at Ethan, she saw traces of Daniel more clearly, the tilt of his head when he was thinking, the way his eyebrows furrowed when he was curious, even the soft hum he made when he concentrated. It was all him. She wanted to be angry, to stay furious at Daniel for crossing a line, but her heart betrayed her each time she replayed his words in the park. He had not been arrogant or defensive. He had looked broken, like a man finally ready to face his past. Still, Julia kept her distance. She needed time and space to figure out how to protect her son without building new walls of bitterness. Daniel, meanwhile, could barely focus on work. The boardroom became a blur of meaningless numbers and voices. His assistant noticed the change. "Sir, are you feeling all right?" she asked one morning after he ended a meeting early. "You have not signed any of the new contracts." Daniel rubbed his temples, his voice low. "They can wait." The assistant nodded nervously and left. As soon as the door closed, Daniel leaned back in his chair and stared out at the skyline. For years, this view had made him feel powerful. Now, it only reminded him of what power could not fix. He opened his phone and looked at a picture he had taken at the Science Museum, the one where Ethan was laughing under the model of Saturn. That small smile had done more to change him than any success ever had. He had to make things right, not through money or status, but through honesty. That evening, he drove to the hospital, waiting outside for Julia's shift to end. She stepped out, tired and cautious, spotting him by the car. "You should not be here," she said, though her tone was softer than before. "I needed to see you," he replied. "Just to talk." Julia folded her arms. "You said your piece already." "I did," Daniel said, "but I do not think I said enough." He handed her an envelope. "This is not another test result. It is a letter, to you and to him. I will not ask you to read it now, but someday, maybe you will." Julia hesitated before taking it. "What is in it?" "Everything I should have said 9 years ago," he answered quietly. She looked at him for a long time before finally nodding. "Good night, Daniel." She walked away, clutching the envelope to her chest. Later, at home, after Ethan had gone to bed, Julia sat at the kitchen table and unfolded the letter. Daniel's handwriting filled the page, steady, deliberate. "Julia," it began, "I do not expect forgiveness. I do not even expect understanding. But I need you to know that walking away from you was the biggest mistake of my life. I believed things that were easier than the truth. I told myself you would be fine without me because admitting otherwise meant admitting that I was a coward. I was wrong. I missed his first word, his first step, his first laugh. I missed everything that mattered, and there is no way to earn that back. But if there is any part of you that can let me try, even as a friend, I promise I will never fail either of you again. Daniel." Julia read it 3 times. The words were simple, but they carried a weight that felt real. She wiped a tear from her cheek and folded the letter carefully, placing it in a drawer. She was not ready to forgive, but she could not deny that something inside her had shifted. The next morning, she found Ethan sitting on the couch with his backpack open, staring at the bracelet on his wrist. "Mom," he said softly, "can I ask you something?" "Of course," she said. "Why does Mr. Daniel care about us so much?" Julia froze, caught off guard. "What makes you think that?" Ethan shrugged. "He looks at you like he wants to say something but doesn't. And when he talks to me, he listens. Like really listens. Grown-ups don't do that much." Julia smiled faintly, brushing his hair back. "He is trying to make up for lost time," she said carefully. "He made mistakes." Ethan looked at her with those same brown eyes that mirrored Daniel's. "Everybody makes mistakes. You always tell me that." Her breath caught. "Yes," she whispered. "I do." That afternoon, Julia walked to the park after work. Daniel was there, sitting on a bench near the playground, watching a group of kids play soccer. He stood when he saw her, surprised. "Julia?" "I read your letter," she said. He waited, unsure if he should speak. "You meant what you wrote?" "Every word," he said. She nodded slowly. "I am not ready to forgive you," she said, "but I am willing to see what trying looks like." Relief washed over his face. "That is all I ask." She took a deep breath. Ethan is smart. He senses things. If he starts asking questions, we tell him together. No more secrets. Daniel nodded, his voice quiet. Together. For a moment, They stood there, the distance between them no longer hostile, just uncertain. Ethan's laughter echoed faintly from the schoolyard nearby, a sound that seemed to reach both their hearts at once. Julia turned to go but paused. "By the way," she said, glancing back, "he wants to visit that science museum again. Maybe you could take him." Daniel smiled for the first time in days, a real smile, one that reached his eyes. "I would love that." As she walked away, he stayed where he was, looking at the playground and whispering to himself, one step at a time. And for the first time in years, those words did not feel like a promise, they felt like hope. The following Saturday morning arrived with a soft golden light that slipped through the thin curtains of Julia's apartment. The smell of pancakes filled the kitchen as Ethan sat at the table, his legs swinging as he tried to pour syrup without spilling. Julia flipped another pancake and smiled at him. "You are getting better at that," she said. "That is because I am practicing," he replied proudly. Before she could answer, there was a gentle knock on the door. Ethan jumped from his chair. "I will get it," he shouted, racing across the living room. Julia froze for a second, already knowing who it would be. When the door opened, Daniel Cross stood there, holding a small paper bag and an uncertain smile. "Good morning," he said. Ethan grinned. "Mom, it is Mr. Daniel. He brought something." Julia wiped her hands on a towel, her expression cautious but calm. "You are early," she said. "We had breakfast plans at 10. Daniel nodded. "I know. I just thought I would stop by with these." He handed her the bag. Inside were art supplies, colored pencils, sketch pads, and small paint bottles. "For Ethan," he said softly. "You mentioned he likes to draw." Ethan's eyes lit up. "Thank you. Can I show you what I made last night?" Daniel glanced at Julia, who gave a small nod. Ethan dashed to his room, leaving them alone in the kitchen. Julia leaned against the counter, her arms crossed. "You are trying very hard," she said. "I told you I would," Daniel replied quietly. "I am not going anywhere." Julia studied him for a moment. "We are going to the park later. You can join us if you want." A faint smile touched his lips. "I would like that." When they arrived at the park, Ethan ran straight to the playground, laughing as he climbed the slide. Daniel sat on the bench beside Julia, watching him with quiet wonder. "He is incredible," Daniel said. "He has your determination." "And your stubbornness," Julia added, her tone teasing but warm. "That is not always a bad thing," he said with a chuckle. For a while, they sat in comfortable silence. The air was filled with the sound of children playing and dogs barking in the distance. Daniel glanced at her. "Julia, I have been thinking about what you said, about telling him together when the time comes." She looked at him, her expression cautious. "Yes? I want to be ready when it happens," he said. "I do not want him to find out through anyone else. Not the media, not anyone from my past. I am handling things at the company to make sure of that." Julia frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "My brother, Nathan," Daniel said, his voice darkening. "He has been trying to undermine me for years. He knows something changed in my life, and if he digs too deep, he will find out about Ethan. I am not going to let that happen." Julia's eyes widened. "You think he would use a child to hurt you?" "He would not think twice," Daniel said. "He has done worse." Julia's hands tightened in her lap. "Then keep Ethan out of it. If this becomes a scandal, if his name ends up anywhere near a headline, it will not," Daniel interrupted firmly. "I promise you that." She looked at him, and for the first time in years, she believed him. Ethan ran back to them, holding a paper airplane. "Look! I made this with the new paper Mr. Daniel gave me." He threw it, and it sailed higher than Julia expected, landing near the pond. "Nice throw," Daniel said, grinning. "You have got good aim." "That is because I practiced," Ethan said proudly, repeating his favorite phrase. Daniel laughed. I am starting to see where he gets that from. The rest of the afternoon passed in easy rhythm. They bought ice cream from a vendor, shared small talk, and for a fleeting moment, it almost felt like the family they might have been. As the sun began to set, Julia packed their things while Ethan chased the last rays of light across the grass. Daniel helped her fold the picnic blanket, their hands brushing. The touch lingered longer than either of them expected. Julia looked up, their eyes meeting. The air between them shifted, heavy with memories and things unsaid. Thank you for today, she said softly. You made him happy. That makes me happy too, Daniel replied. As they walked back toward the car, Ethan slipped his hand into each of theirs, linking them together without realizing it. Julia glanced down, then at Daniel. Neither spoke, but both felt it, the quiet rhythm of something mending. That night, after Julia tucked Ethan into bed, she found herself sitting by the window, staring at the city lights. For the first time in years, she did not feel alone. Across town, Daniel sat in his office, a file open on his desk. Inside was a confidential report, one that confirmed his fears. Nathan had been investigating him, digging into his personal life. A photograph lay on top of the papers, blurry but recognizable, Julia and Ethan leaving the park. Daniel's stomach dropped. He knew what was coming. His past was about to crash into his present, threatening everything he had just begun to rebuild. He picked up the phone, his voice steady but low. Nathan, we need to talk. On the other end, his brother's voice carried that familiar smugness. I was wondering how long it would take you to call. Daniel's jaw tightened. Stay away from them. Nathan chuckled. You think you can tell me what to do, big brother? Let us see how far you are willing to go for your little secret. When the call ended, Daniel sat in silence, his hand trembling slightly. He looked at the photo again and whispered, I will not let him hurt you. Either of you. Outside, the city lights flickered like watchful eyes, and the storm that had once seemed to fade began to gather again, slowly, quietly, waiting for its moment to strike. The morning after Daniel's call with his brother began like any other, but something in the air felt heavier. The city was alive with its usual rhythm, yet Daniel could not shake the unease that sat deep in his chest. He had spent most of the night staring at the photo Nathan had taken of Julia and Ethan, his thoughts running wild. He knew his brother well enough to understand that this was not just curiosity, it was leverage. Nathan had always viewed life as a game, and now he had found Daniel's weak spot. That afternoon, Daniel received an email from Nathan. The subject line was simple, coffee. The message was short, containing an address and a time. No threats, no explanations. Daniel knew exactly what it meant. He drove to the cafe, a quiet place tucked between a bookstore and a florist. Nathan was already there, sitting at a corner table, his posture casual but his smile sharp. You look tired, brother, Nathan said, stirring his coffee. Too much late-night family bonding. Daniel sat down across from him, his jaw tight. What do you want? Nathan leaned back in his chair. Relax. I am just happy to see you finally have a personal life. That photo of the nurse and the kid, adorable, really. The resemblance is uncanny. Daniel's stomach turned. Stay out of this. Nathan's eyes gleamed. You know I can't. The board would love to know that their golden CEO has been hiding an illegitimate child. It would make quite the headline, don't you think? He is not illegitimate, Daniel said, his voice low but firm. He is my son. Nathan tilted his head, feigning surprise. So it is true then. That makes it even better. Daniel's hands clenched into fists. If you go near them, I swear you will what? Nathan interrupted, laughing softly. Daniel, you always play by the rules. That is why you are predictable. You think you can protect them, but the moment this gets out, every news outlet in the country will be camped outside their door. Do you really want that for your precious Julia and her little boy? Daniel's breath came slow and controlled, his anger barely contained. "What do you want, Nathan?" Nathan's smile widened. "Simple. Step down from Cross-Tech. Hand me the position. You get to keep your image as the noble recluse who left the empire for love, and I get what I deserve. Everyone wins." "You do not deserve anything," Daniel said. Nathan's tone hardened. "Then maybe I let the world decide that. Maybe I tell the board first. Maybe I send a copy of that photo to the press." Daniel rose from his chair, his voice trembling with restrained fury. "You will regret it if you do." Nathan smirked. "We will see." Daniel left before he did something he could not take back. The cold air outside hit him like a wave, grounding him. He walked aimlessly for a while, trying to think, trying to breathe. He had spent his life building walls, but now every one of them was crumbling, and the only thing that mattered was keeping Julia and Ethan safe. That evening, Julia noticed the tension in his voice when he called. "You sound strange," she said. "Is everything all right?" "Everything is fine," Daniel said quickly. "I just wanted to hear your voice." Julia hesitated. "Daniel, what is going on?" "Nothing," he lied. "Just work." "You promise no more lies," she said softly. The silence on the line was enough of an answer. "I will come by tomorrow," she said. "We can talk then." The next morning, Daniel was waiting outside her apartment when she opened the door. He looked exhausted, his usually steady composure cracked. "Julia, there is something I need to tell you," he said. "Nathan found out about you and Ethan." Her face drained of color. "How?" "He has been watching me. He took photos. He is trying to use this to force me out of the company." Julia's voice shook. "So this is about business?" "No," Daniel said, stepping closer. "It is about power. He knows I will do anything to protect you both." "Then maybe you should," she said bitterly. "Step down. Walk away." "It is not that simple," Daniel said. "If I leave, he will still come after me. After us. He does not care about the position. He just wants to destroy me." Julia's eyes filled with fear. "Daniel, I cannot let Ethan get dragged into this." "He will not," Daniel promised. "I will fix it." "You said that before," she whispered, tears spilling over. "And look where we are." He reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "Please, Julia," he said, his voice breaking. "Just trust me one more time." "I do not know if I can," she said. "But for Ethan's sake, you had better be right." Daniel nodded slowly, knowing he was running out of chances. As he walked back to his car, he caught sight of a black sedan parked across the street. A man inside lowered his phone, watching him drive away. Daniel's stomach turned. Nathan had already made his move. That night, a story leaked online, nothing detailed, just a rumor. Anonymous sources close to Cross-Tech suggest the CEO may be involved in a private scandal involving a child. Daniel's phone began buzzing relentlessly. He turned it off and stared at the skyline outside his window. His reflection stared back, tired, haunted, and resolute. He whispered to himself, "You want a war, Nathan? You have got one." Across the city, Julia checked her phone, saw the headline, and closed her eyes. She knew everything was about to change again, and this time, the truth might not save them, it might destroy them. The story broke wide open within 48 hours. What had begun as a quiet rumor turned into a full-blown headline that spread across every financial and gossip outlet in the city. Cross-Tech CEO accused of hiding secret family, read one banner across the morning news, accompanied by blurry photographs of Daniel leaving Julia's apartment and walking with Ethan through the park. The images told a story of their own, twisted and exaggerated by speculation. Reporters camped outside Daniel's corporate building, and soon, they found their way to Julia's neighborhood too. She woke up to the sound of voices outside her window and the flashing of cameras through the blinds. Panic surged through her chest. Ethan peeked from behind the curtain. "Mom, why are there people outside?" Julia forced a steady breath. "They are just being nosy, honey. Go to your room and play for a bit." She locked the door, her hands trembling as she dialed Daniel's number. He answered immediately, his voice low and tense. "I saw it," he said before she could speak. "Do not open the door to anyone. I am sending security to you right now." "Daniel," she whispered, trying to keep her voice from breaking, "this is exactly what I was afraid of." "I know," he said, his tone filled with guilt. "I am so sorry. I am going to fix it." "You cannot fix this," she snapped softly. "It is everywhere. They know where we live." Ethan's voice called from the other room. "Mom, they are taking pictures." Julia's heart raced. "Daniel, please, just make it stop. Stay calm." "I am on my way," he said and hung up. Within 30 minutes, Daniel's black sedan pulled up outside her building. His security team cleared a path, blocking the cameras as he rushed up the stairs. When Julia opened the door, he saw the fear in her eyes and the confusion in Ethan's. The boy clung to his mother's arm, asking questions she could not answer. "Why are they taking pictures of us? Did we do something bad?" "No, sweetheart," Julia said gently, kneeling beside him. "You did nothing wrong. Sometimes adults make mistakes and other people do not understand." Daniel crouched beside them. "Hey, buddy," he said softly. "Remember when we talked about being brave?" Ethan nodded. "Well, I need you to be brave again, okay? Just for a little while." "Okay," Ethan said, though his small voice wavered. Daniel looked up at Julia. "Pack a few things. We are leaving." "Where?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Somewhere safe," he replied. "I have a house outside the city. No one knows about it." "Daniel, this is insane," she said. "Running away will make it worse. Staying here will, too," he said. "They will not stop until they get what they want." Julia hesitated for only a moment before grabbing a small bag and packing clothes for Ethan. As they hurried out, the flashes outside exploded like lightning. Reporters shouted questions. "Mr. Cross, is it true the boy is your son? Miss Monroe, were you part of a cover-up?" Daniel shielded Ethan with his arm, guiding them quickly into the car. The door slammed shut, sealing out the chaos. As the car pulled away, Julia leaned back, shaking. "He should not have to see this," she whispered. "He should not have to see any of it." Daniel's jaw tightened. "He will not. I promise you that." The drive out of the city was long and silent. Ethan fell asleep in the back seat, his head resting against the window. Julia stared out at the passing lights, her thoughts a blur of anger and disbelief. "I told you this would happen," she said finally. "You thought you could control everything, but you cannot control people's cruelty." Daniel's voice was quiet but heavy. "I know. But I can control how I protect you." "At what cost?" she asked. "You have a company, a reputation, none of that matters anymore," he said firmly. "You and Ethan matter. That is all." They reached the countryside just before dawn. The safe house sat on a hill surrounded by trees, quiet and hidden from the world. Julia stepped out of the car, breathing in the cold air. The house was modern but warm, with large windows that looked out over a field of tall grass. Ethan rubbed his eyes. "Where are we?" "Somewhere we can rest," Daniel said. He led them inside and turned on a few lights. Julia walked through the room slowly, still in disbelief at how quickly her world had turned upside down. "They will find us eventually," she said. "Reporters always do." "Not here," Daniel said. "This place was my father's. No one outside the family knows about it." Julia looked at him sharply. "And your brother?" Daniel's expression hardened. "He will not get that far." I will make sure of it. She sighed, sitting down on the couch as Ethan curled up beside her. For a long moment, they sat in silence, the tension of the day slowly fading into exhaustion. Daniel stood by the window, watching the first light of morning touch the horizon. He had spent years chasing power, and now, for the first time, he was using it for something that actually mattered. He turned back to them and said softly, "You are safe here. I promise." Julia looked up, her eyes weary but searching his face for truth. "For how long?" she asked. Daniel did not answer. Outside, the world was waking up, and with it came the promise of another fight, a fight not for money or control, but for love, protection, and redemption. And Daniel Cross knew he would not lose this one. The next morning at the safe house began in quiet stillness. The scent of pine drifted through the open windows, and the sound of birds replaced the noise of city traffic. Julia Monroe stood at the kitchen counter, pouring coffee, her movement slow and deliberate. She had barely slept, her mind replaying the chaos from the day before. Across the room, Daniel Cross was on the phone, speaking in a low, controlled tone. "I do not care what it costs," he said. "Pull every article that has my name, hers, or the boys'. I want it gone from every major outlet within the next 24 hours. There was a pause. "Then make them care. That is what lawyers are for." He hung up and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Julia watched him, her voice soft but edged. "You cannot buy silence forever." "Maybe not," he said, turning to face her, "but I can delay the noise long enough to keep you both safe." "Safe," she repeated. Quietly. "We are hiding in a house in the middle of nowhere. That is not safety, Daniel. That is running." He sighed, his shoulders heavy. "You are right. But right now, running is all I can do until I stop my brother." She set her cup down. "What exactly are you planning?" "I have resources he does not know about," Daniel said. "People who still owe me favors. If I can track who leaked the story, I can cut the trail." Julia crossed her arms. "And if you cannot?" He met her gaze. "Then I will make him wish he never tried." "Revenge will not fix this," she said firmly. "You think I do not know that?" Daniel replied, his tone sharp before softening. "I am not doing this for revenge. I am doing it to end the war he started." From the hallway, a small voice interrupted. "Are you fighting?" Ethan stood in the doorway, rubbing his eyes, clutching his stuffed bear. Julia quickly shook her head. "No, sweetheart. We are just talking." Daniel forced a smile and knelt down. "Hey, champ. How about breakfast? I make a mean stack of pancakes." Ethan brightened immediately. "With chocolate chips?" "Of course," Daniel said. "It is a rule." The boy laughed, running to the table. Julia watched as Daniel cooked, moving awkwardly but with effort. He burned the first batch, earning a giggle from Ethan, but the second came out golden and perfect. For a few minutes, the kitchen felt like a home again, warm, real, and fragile. Later that afternoon, Julia stepped outside for some air. The hills stretched endlessly, the wind carrying the faint scent of cedar and wildflowers. She wrapped her sweater tighter around her shoulders as Daniel joined her on the porch. "He likes it here," Daniel said, glancing through the window at Ethan drawing with crayons. "He likes anywhere he feels safe," Julia replied. "You know, he has not asked who you really are yet." "He will," Daniel said quietly. "And when he does, I will tell him the truth." Julia nodded, looking out toward the trees. "He deserves that." Silence fell between them, filled only by the sound of the wind. Then Daniel's phone buzzed. He answered, his tone tense. "What did you find?" He listened for a moment, his face darkening. "Are you sure?" Another pause. "Send me everything." He ended the call and turned to Julia. "It was not just Nathan," he said. "He had help from someone inside Cross Tech." "Someone who works for you?" Julia asked, startled. Used to, Daniel corrected. A man I fired last year for fraud. Nathan must have bought him. So now what? She asked. Now, Daniel said, I take back control. That night, after Ethan fell asleep, Daniel set up his laptop at the dining table. The glow from the screen illuminated his face as he typed. Julia sat nearby, pretending to read but watching him instead. You are not just handling business, are you? She asked quietly. No, he admitted. I am transferring everything I own, stocks, properties, assets, into a trust under Ethan's name. If Nathan tries to destroy me, he will find nothing left to take. Julia's breath caught. You would give up everything. I already lost everything once, Daniel said softly. Money means nothing without peace. She stared at him, seeing the man she once loved buried beneath the years of ambition and regret. You really have changed, she said. Daniel looked up from the screen, meeting her eyes. You changed me, he said simply. Julia turned away, blinking back tears. Do not say that. Why not? Because if I believe you, she whispered, I might start to forgive you. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The night stretched on, quiet and heavy, until the only sound was the wind brushing against the glass. Somewhere outside, an owl called softly into the dark. Julia finally stood. I am going to check on Ethan, she said. Daniel nodded, watching her disappear down the hallway. When she was gone, he closed the laptop and stared at the darkness outside. His reflection looked back, haunted, but alive. He whispered to himself, You will not win, Nathan. Not this time. Upstairs, Julia stood in the doorway of Ethan's room, watching him sleep peacefully, his small hand resting on the pillow. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to hope, not for miracles, but for the strength to face whatever was coming next. In the stillness of the night, both she and Daniel understood something unspoken. This was no longer just about survival. It was about redemption, love, and the price of finally choosing what truly mattered. The next morning broke with a pale light cutting through the mist that hung over the hills. Julia Monroe woke early, wrapping her robe around herself as she stepped into the living room. Daniel Cross was already there, sitting by the large window, a mug of coffee in his hand and dark circles under his eyes. He had not slept. His laptop still glowed faintly on the table beside him. You stayed up again, she said quietly. He looked at her and tried to smile. I had things to finish. You mean more damage control, she said. He nodded. Nathan's trying to force a board meeting in 2 days. If he succeeds, he'll vote me out as CEO. I can't let him win. Julia sighed, rubbing her temples. Daniel, you have already given up most of your control. Why does it still matter? Because if I lose the company completely, he'll have more power to keep going after us. This is not just about the company anymore, it is about leverage. Before she could reply, small footsteps padded down the hallway. Ethan appeared, his hair messy from sleep, holding his stuff bare. Good morning, he said with a yawn. Julia smiled softly. Good morning, sweetheart. Did you sleep well? He said, climbing onto the couch beside Daniel. Can we make pancakes again? Daniel laughed, the sound rough but real. I think that can be arranged. As Julia began breakfast, Daniel and Ethan built a small tower of playing cards on the table. It was fragile, trembling with each movement, but they laughed through every collapse and rebuild. Julia watched them from the kitchen, her heart caught between fear and something tender. For a moment, they looked like a real family, one that had weathered storms and was still standing. But the peace did not last. Around noon, Daniel's phone buzzed with an encrypted message. He opened it, and his face went cold. Julia noticed instantly. What is it? She asked. He showed her the screen. It was a live feed from a news outlet. A voiceover played over flashing headlines, Crosstech board to hold emergency session amid allegations of misconduct. Sources claim CEO Daniel Cross may step down following a corporate scandal involving a personal relationship and undisclosed child. Julia's stomach sank. They are still talking about us. They will not stop, Daniel said grimly. Nathan leaked more files. What kind of files? Emails between me and my lawyer about setting up Ethan's trust. He twisted it to make it sound like I was funneling company money for personal use. That is absurd, Julia said. People will believe it, Daniel replied. That is the problem. Ethan looked between them, sensing the tension. Mom, are we in trouble? Julia knelt beside him, brushing his hair gently. No, honey. We are just trying to fix something that got a little messy. Daniel's phone buzzed again, this time with a call. He stepped outside to answer it. Julia could hear the sharpness in his tone even through the walls. When he returned, his expression was unreadable. That was my legal team, he said. The board meeting is happening tomorrow, not in 2 days. They are forcing a vote to remove me permanently. What will you do? Julia asked. I am going to fight, Daniel said. But I will not risk you and Ethan. You need to stay here. Alone? With the media still searching for us, she asked incredulously. I will have security stationed outside. You will be safe, he promised. Julia shook her head. You cannot keep trying to protect us from everything. You are not invincible, Daniel. Maybe not, he said quietly, but I have something worth being brave for now. That night, Julia tucked Ethan into bed, reading him a story about a ship captain who found his way home through a storm. When he fell asleep, she went downstairs to find Daniel staring at a document on his laptop. What are you doing? She asked softly. Writing my resignation letter, he said. If it means ending this fight and keeping you both out of the spotlight, I will step down before they force me. But you said you could win, Julia said. Winning and surviving are not the same thing, Daniel replied. She walked closer, standing beside him. You are not the man who used to fight just to prove you were right. You are fighting for the right reasons now. Maybe that is worth more than victory. Daniel looked at her, his voice low. You always see the part of me I tried to bury. That is because I remember who you were before all of this, she said. The man who sketched dream houses on napkins. The one who thought love was enough. His eyes softened. And now? Now, she whispered, I see a man who finally believes it again. They stood there, silent, as the night deepened around them. For the first time in a long time, Daniel felt something close to peace, even knowing the storm he would walk into the next day. When he finally went upstairs, he paused at Ethan's door. The boy was asleep, clutching his bear. Daniel knelt beside the bed and whispered, You changed everything, kid. You gave me a reason to be better. The next morning, before the sun rose, Daniel was already gone. Julia found a note on the table, Do not worry. I will come back for both of you. No matter what happens. She pressed the letter to her chest, whispering a silent prayer that this time, he would keep his promise. Outside, the sky was grey and heavy, as if the world itself was holding its breath for what was about to come. The morning of the board meeting arrived wrapped in cold rain and heavy clouds that seemed to mirror the tension building inside Daniel Cross. He stood before the tall glass windows of Crosstech Tower, watching the storm roll across the skyline. The reflection staring back at him looked older, harder, and more human than the man who once thought he was untouchable. He straightened his tie slowly, the gesture almost ritualistic, and whispered to himself, You have faced worse. You can face this. Behind him, his assistant, Maria, stepped forward quietly. Sir, they are all here. Nathan arrived early. Daniel nodded. Of course he did. She hesitated, then asked, Are you sure you want to go through with this? You could still delay it. No, he said firmly. I will not run anymore. When he entered the boardroom, the chatter died immediately. 12 directors sat around the long oak table, their expressions a mixture of curiosity, judgment, and unease. At the far end sat Nathan Cross, his posture relaxed, a faint smirk playing on his lips. "Brother," Nathan said smoothly. "So good of you to join us. I was beginning to think you might not show." Daniel took his seat at the head of the table, the position that had been his for over a decade. "You called this meeting," he said evenly. "Let us get to it." Nathan leaned forward, feigning concern. "We are all just trying to protect the company's reputation. The headlines have not been kind. Investors are nervous. They want reassurance." Daniel's jaw tightened. "You mean they want blood?" "If that is what it takes to save the business," Nathan replied with mock sympathy, "then yes." One of the older board members, Mr. Halvorsen, cleared his throat. "Gentlemen, please. Let us keep this civil." "Mr. Cross," he said, turning to Daniel, "the evidence presented raises serious questions. Funds were transferred to a private account associated with the name Ethan Monroe. Would you like to explain that?" Daniel met his gaze without flinching. "Yes. That account is part of a personal trust one established for my son." A ripple of murmurs spread around the table. Nathan raised an eyebrow. "So it is true. The rumors were not exaggerated after all." Daniel's voice remained calm. "The trust was created with my own money, not company assets. Every cent can be traced." Nathan chuckled. "You expect us to believe that?" "You do not have to believe me," Daniel said, sliding a folder across the table. "The proof is right there. Independent audits, dated transactions, and signed authorizations. I made sure everything was legal because I knew one day you would come for me." Nathan's smile faltered slightly, but he recovered quickly. "Even if that is true, the scandal alone damages our credibility. You put the company at risk by hiding your relationship." Daniel looked around the room, meeting each pair of eyes. "You are right. I made mistakes. I kept secrets. But not because I was ashamed of my family, because I wanted to protect them from exactly this. From vultures who see human lives as bargaining chips." He turned his gaze back to Nathan. "This company was built on integrity, on the idea that innovation serves people, not egos. Somewhere along the way, we forgot that." The room went quiet. Nathan stood, his tone dripping with false authority. "Enough speeches. We are voting. All those in favor of removing Daniel Cross as CEO, raise your hands." Several hands lifted slowly. Daniel watched without emotion. Nathan smiled in victory, until Mr. Halvorsen spoke. "Before we finalize, I would like to note something. Mr. Cross submitted a proposal this morning transferring all executive control to an independent trust until the investigation concludes. He also transferred his personal shares to a beneficiary, his son." The room buzzed with confusion. Nathan's face darkened. "What?" Daniel stood. "I am stepping down voluntarily, Nathan. You cannot fire me because I already left. And you cannot take the company because I no longer own it. The trust will manage Crosstech transparently until Ethan is old enough to inherit. You can fight all you want, but there will be nothing left to steal." Nathan slammed his hand on the table. "You cannot do that." Daniel met his rage with calm. "I just did." He gathered his folder and turned to leave. "You wanted to destroy me, brother. Instead, I took away the only weapon you had, power." As he walked out, the rain outside intensified, hammering the glass. Nathan shouted something behind him, but Daniel did not hear. He felt strangely lighter, as if the weight of years had lifted off his shoulders. Outside, Maria was waiting with an umbrella. "How did it go?" she asked. Daniel gave a faint smile. "I think I finally did the right thing." "And Nathan?" she asked. "He will destroy himself trying to fix what he cannot control," Daniel said quietly. "He always does." When he stepped out into the rain, the wind hit his face, cold but cleansing. He got into his car and called Julia. she answered after one ring, her voice tense. Daniel. It is over, he said softly. I stepped down. You did what? I did it for us. For Ethan. He is free from all of it now. There was silence on the other end, followed by a shaky breath. Come home, she whispered. Just come home. Daniel smiled for the first time in days. I am already on my way. As his car pulled away from the city, the skyline faded into the storm, and for the first time in his life, Daniel Cross felt something greater than success. He felt peace. He had lost everything the world valued, but gained everything that truly mattered. By the time Daniel Cross reached the safe house, the rain had slowed to a mist, leaving the world washed clean and quiet. The long drive through the countryside had given him too much time to think. He had walked into that boardroom carrying the weight of his past, and he had walked out lighter but unsure of what his future would be. When he parked the car and stepped inside, he found Julia Monroe sitting by the window, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had long gone cold. She looked up, her eyes searching his face. You did it, she said softly. It is over, he replied. Nathan cannot touch us anymore. He will try, but he has nothing left to hold against me. You stepped down, she said, as if trying to believe it. You really let it go. Daniel nodded slowly. I had to. It was never really mine anymore. The company had become a cage. Walking away was the only way to set us free. Julia studied him for a moment, then whispered, You actually kept your promise. He gave a tired smile. I told you I would come back. Before either of them could say more, small footsteps echoed down the hallway. Ethan appeared, rubbing his eyes. When he saw Daniel, his face lit up with a grin. You are back, he said, running forward. Daniel knelt, catching him in his arms. I am back, buddy. And I am not going anywhere. Ethan hugged him tightly, his small hands gripping Daniel's shirt. Mom said you had to do something important. Did you win? Daniel hesitated, then said softly, I did what was right. Sometimes that is better than winning. Ethan tilted his head, trying to understand, then nodded as if that made perfect sense. Does that mean we can go home now? Daniel looked up at Julia. Soon, she said gently. We will find a new home. Somewhere quiet. Ethan smiled sleepily. As long as we are all together. After putting Ethan back to bed, Julia and Daniel stepped outside to the porch. The moon had risen, breaking through the thinning clouds. For the first time in months, the world seemed still. Julia turned to him. So what happens now? I do not know, Daniel admitted. For the first time in years, I do not have a plan. I have money set aside. Enough to build something new. Something new, she repeated quietly. That sounds terrifying. It is, he said with a small laugh. But it also sounds like hope. She leaned against the wooden railing, her gaze lost in the silver glow of the field. You really meant what you said back then, didn't you? About not caring about the empire anymore. I did, he said. Because I finally realized that power without peace is just noise. And I am tired of noise. What about Nathan? She asked. He will not give up easily. He will implode, Daniel said. He always does when there is no one left to fight. I think I just took away his favorite opponent. Julia smiled faintly. You make it sound like a game. It was, once, Daniel said. But now I just want a life that is quiet. Simple. Real. She looked at him for a long moment, her eyes softening. And where do we fit into that life? Daniel hesitated. You are the only part that makes it real. Julia turned away, her voice barely above a whisper. You are different now, Daniel. But it is hard for me to forget who you were. Then do not forget, he said. Just remember that I am still here, trying to make things right. The wind stirred, carrying the faint sound of crickets across the field. It was the kind of silence that invited truth. Julia sighed, crossing her arms. You do not make it easy to stay angry. That is all I am hoping for, he said quietly. She laughed softly. You really have changed. You and Ethan changed me, he said. You showed me what matters when everything else falls apart. Inside the house, the floor creaked lightly. Julia turned her head just in time to see Ethan standing in the doorway, his blanket wrapped around him. Mom, he said sleepily, can I sleep in your room tonight? The rain sounds loud again. Julia smiled. Of course, sweetheart. She looked at Daniel. Good night. Good night, he said softly. After she disappeared inside, Daniel remained on the porch, watching the mist roll over the hills. For the first time in his life, he did not feel like a man running from his mistakes. He felt like a man who had finally stopped long enough to face them. As the night deepened, he pulled out his phone and opened a message draft he had been avoiding. It was addressed to his brother. Nathan, he typed, you have won nothing. You can keep the title, but I will keep my peace. One day you will understand which one is worth more. He hit send, turned off the phone, and exhaled. Inside, Julia checked on Ethan, tucking him in and brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. As she stood there, she whispered a small prayer, not for wealth, not for revenge, but for the quiet strength to rebuild from the ruins. Downstairs, Daniel leaned back in his chair, his eyes fixed on the horizon. Tomorrow would bring uncertainty. But for tonight, for the first time in years, there was nothing chasing him. Only the steady rhythm of rain, the warmth of a home, and the promise of a new beginning waiting in the dawn. The following week passed in a fragile calm that felt almost unnatural to Daniel Cross. Each morning, the sound of birds replaced the city's noise, and for the first time in years, he could hear his own thoughts without the constant echo of ambition. He spent the days helping Julia around the house, fixing the old porch steps, repainting the kitchen walls, and even planting a few flowers with Ethan near the edge of the yard. Life had slowed into something gentle, something real. Yet beneath the peace, a quiet tension lingered, like a storm that had not fully passed. Julia noticed it every time Daniel's phone buzzed and he let it ring without answering. She knew there were things he was not saying, things about his brother, about the company, about the future he had left behind. One evening, after Ethan had gone to bed, Julia joined Daniel outside where he was sitting on the porch steps, staring out at the horizon. You have not checked the news in days, she said softly. That is on purpose, he replied. I do not need to see it to know how it ends. Nathan will burn himself out trying to control what he does not understand. And what about you? She asked. What do you understand now? Daniel smiled faintly. That peace costs more than power ever will. She sat beside him, pulling her sweater closer around her shoulders. Do you ever regret it? Walking away from everything. Every morning, he said honestly. And then I see you too, and I stop regretting. Julia looked down at her hands. You know, I never thought we would end up like this. You hear, me here, trying to pretend we know how to live ordinary lives. Maybe ordinary is what we were meant to have all along, he said. She laughed quietly. You? Ordinary? That is a stretch. I am learning, he said, smiling. Slowly. For a moment, silence settled between them. Then Julia said, Ethan asked me today if you were his dad. Daniel froze. His heartbeat quickened, though his voice stayed calm. What did you tell him? I told him that sometimes families do not look the way people expect. That love is what makes a family, not just names or papers. Daniel's eyes softened. That was a good answer. He is getting older, she said. He is going to start asking harder questions soon. Then I will be ready, Daniel said. I owe him the truth. Julia turned toward him, her voice barely above a whisper. He already knows, Daniel. Maybe not with words, but he knows. He feels it. Daniel stared out into the distance, the weight of her words settling over him. When the time comes, I will tell him everything. I do not want his story to start with lies the way ours did. Julia smiled faintly. That is all I wanted to hear. The next morning, sunlight poured through the windows, warm and golden. Ethan was in the yard, chasing butterflies with a net, laughing as the wind tangled his hair. Daniel watched him from the porch, a mug of coffee in hand. For the first time, the sound of that laughter felt like the truest measure of success he had ever known. Julia stepped out beside him, shielding her eyes from the sun. He looks happy, she said. He is, Daniel replied. He deserves to be. You do too, she said. Do not forget that. He glanced at her, smiling softly. I will try. But the moment of peace was broken when a dark sedan appeared at the end of the dirt road. Daniel's body went tense immediately. Stay with Ethan, he said, his tone shifting from calm to alert. Daniel, who is it? Julia asked, her voice rising. I do not know, he said, walking toward the driveway. The car stopped a few feet away, and a tall man in a black suit stepped out, holding an envelope. Mr. Cross, the man said. This was delivered to your former office. Your assistant insisted it was urgent. Daniel hesitated, then took the envelope. The man nodded once and drove away. Julia joined him as he tore it open. Inside was a letter with Nathan's signature at the bottom. Daniel read it silently, his jaw tightening. What is it? Julia asked. He handed it to her. The letter was short, you think you are free, but Crosstech was never yours to give away. You built it on lies, and I am going to prove it. Enjoy your quiet while it lasts. Julia's face paled. He is not finished. He is desperate, Daniel said. He has already lost the company, and now he is trying to drag me back into the dirt with him. He cannot touch me legally, but that will not stop him from trying. What are you going to do? She asked. Nothing, Daniel said. If I fight, I become him. I am done fighting. But what if he comes after us again? Julia said, her voice trembling. Daniel reached for her hand, steady and sure. Then he will learn what happens when he underestimates what peace is worth. That night, after Ethan went to bed, Daniel sat by the window, staring out at the field bathed in moonlight. He thought about the man he used to be, the one who measured success in numbers, the one who thought love was a weakness. That man was gone, replaced by someone who finally understood what it meant to lose everything and still have everything that mattered. Upstairs, Julia checked on Ethan, finding him asleep with his sketchbook open beside him. On the page was a drawing of 3 stick figures holding hands under a house, labeled in his messy handwriting, Mom, Dad, Me. Julia stood there for a long moment, her eyes blurring with tears. Downstairs, Daniel closed his eyes, unaware of the drawing, but somehow feeling the peace it represented. Outside, the wind carried the sound of the trees like a lullaby, and for the first time, the world around them felt still, not because the storm was gone, but because they had learned how to stand together in its aftermath. The following morning arrived with a thick fog that clung to the trees outside the safe house. Daniel Cross sat at the kitchen table, staring at the letter from Nathan one more time. The words felt like a ghost of the life he thought he had escaped, a final challenge from the brother who refused to let go. Julia Monroe entered quietly, her hair tied back, her face calm but watchful. You have been sitting there for an hour, she said softly. It will not change what he wrote. I know, Daniel replied. But I also know Nathan. He is not bluffing. He never sends warnings unless he is already 2 steps ahead. Then what do we do? She asked. We live, he said simply. We do not run. This time. If he wants to come, let him see what a man with nothing left to lose looks like. Julia studied him for a long moment. You sound like the Daniel I used to know, she said. The one who never backed down from a fight. Maybe, Daniel said. But this time, I am not fighting for power. I am fighting for peace. He stood and began making breakfast, the scent of coffee filling the kitchen. For a moment, it almost felt like any other morning. Ethan came bounding down the stairs, his laughter echoing through the hall. "Good morning," he said cheerfully. "Can we go to the lake today?" Julia smiled. "If the weather clears, maybe." Daniel looked at him and nodded. "I think we can make that happen." The boy beamed, completely unaware of the quiet storm hanging between the adults. After breakfast, Ethan ran outside with his fishing pole while Julia and Daniel cleaned up. The silence between them was comfortable, the kind of silence that came from shared exhaustion rather than distance. "You know," Julia said after a moment, "you could still call the police. Report Nathan's threats." "I could," Daniel said, rinsing a plate, "but then this becomes public again. He wants me cornered, desperate. I will not give him that satisfaction." "Then what will you do?" "I will wait," he said. "And when he makes his move, I will end it my way." Julia frowned. "You sound like you are planning something dangerous." Daniel turned, drying his hands. "I am planning to protect my family. That is all." The day passed quietly until late afternoon when a delivery truck appeared at the end of the road. Daniel watched it from the porch, his instincts prickling. The driver stepped out holding a small parcel. "Package for Daniel Cross," he said. Daniel hesitated, then signed for it. Julia appeared behind him. "Who would send something here?" "Let's find out," he said, opening the box carefully. Inside was a single flash drive and a note that read, "Since you like playing the hero, here is your next move. Check the files before the press does." Tick-tock. Daniel's stomach dropped. He rushed inside, plugging the drive into his laptop. A folder opened with dozens of documents, emails, contracts, and old financial statements from Cross-Tech. As he scrolled, he realized what Nathan had done. "He forged transfers," Daniel said in disbelief. "He is making it look like I used company funds to build the trust for Ethan. If these reach the media, it will look like I stole millions. Can you prove it is fake?" Julia asked. "Eventually," Daniel said. "But the damage will be done before that. This is exactly what he wants." Julia grabbed his arm. "Then you have to do something now." Daniel's eyes hardened. "I will." That night, after Ethan was asleep, Daniel sat alone with the laptop glowing before him. He recorded a video, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "My name is Daniel Cross," he began. "There are people who will try to destroy my name, but I will not let lies define me anymore. I made mistakes in my life, many of them, but I will not apologize for protecting my family. If you see this, know that the truth is not always the story being sold to you." When he finished, he sent the video to Maria, his former assistant, with a short message, "Release this if anything happens to me." Then he closed the laptop and looked out the window, watching the fog drift like ghosts across the field. Julia found him there a while later. "You did something, didn't you?" she asked quietly. "Just a precaution," he said. "I am not letting Nathan write the ending." "I hate that it has come to this," she said. "So do I," he replied. "But sometimes peace has to be fought for before it can be earned." She stepped closer, her voice breaking. "Just promise me one thing, whatever happens, do not leave us again." Daniel turned, his gaze steady. "I promise. This time, I am staying." Outside, thunder rolled faintly in the distance. Julia shivered, sensing that the storm they thought they had escaped was circling back one last time. Later that night, when the house was dark and quiet, headlights flashed across the field. A car slowed near the gate, its engine idling for a moment before driving off into the fog. Daniel stood at the window, watching. He knew it was a message, a warning that the past was not finished with him yet. He whispered to himself, "Let it come. I am not running anymore." Upstairs, Julia stirred in her sleep while Ethan dreamed peacefully, unaware of the danger creeping closer. The wind picked up outside, rattling the windows as if to remind them that storms never truly vanish, they only wait for the right time to return. The storm broke at dawn. Rain came down in heavy sheets, washing over the countryside and turning the dirt road into rivers of mud. Daniel Cross woke to the sound of thunder, his instincts sharp and alert. He moved to the window and saw the familiar black sedan parked at the edge of the property. Nathan had come. Downstairs, Julia Monroe was already awake, her expression tense as she handed Daniel his coat. "You knew this would happen," she said. "I hoped it would not," he replied. "But Nathan never lets go until he breaks something." "Then let him break himself this time," she whispered. He nodded and stepped out into the storm. The rain soaked him instantly as he approached the car. The driver's door opened, and Nathan Cross stepped out, wearing a dark suit, his hair plastered to his forehead. He looked furious but controlled, the kind of calm that came before destruction. "You did this to yourself," Daniel said evenly. "You could have walked away." "Walked away?" Nathan laughed bitterly. "You took my company, my legacy, my life's work." "You destroyed that yourself," Daniel said. "I just stopped you from hurting anyone else." Nathan stepped closer. "You think you are the hero in this story, do you? The noble brother who gave it all up for love and redemption? Let me tell you something, Daniel. People like us do not get redemption. We get consequences." "Then face yours," Daniel said. "Because I am done carrying both our sins." Nathan's eyes flickered with something, rage, maybe grief, and then he reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a small envelope. "The media will get these in an hour," he said. "Documents, transfers, enough to bury you forever. Unless you take it back." "Take what back?" Daniel asked. "The trust," Nathan snapped. "Sign it over. End this charade before it destroys both of us." Daniel stared at him through the rain. "You do not understand, do you? It is already over. I uploaded the real records last night. Every fake document you created is being audited right now by federal investigators. By noon, the world will know exactly who forged what." Nathan's face went pale. "You are lying." "No," Daniel said quietly. "For once, I am telling the truth." Nathan's hand trembled as he dropped the envelope, rain soaking through the paper. "You would ruin your own brother." "You ruined yourself," Daniel said. "I just stopped pretending it was my fault." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The storm howled around them, and then Nathan turned and walked back toward his car. He paused with the door open. "You think you have won," he said. "But all you did was trade one prison for another." Daniel met his gaze. "Maybe. But this one has windows." Nathan drove away without another word, tires splashing through the mud. Daniel stood there until the car disappeared down the hill, the storm fading into a soft drizzle. When he returned to the house, Julia was waiting, her eyes filled with questions. "Is it over?" she asked. Daniel hesitated, then nodded. "Yes. He will not bother us again." She exhaled, relief mixing with disbelief. "I do not know how you keep standing after all this." "Because of you," he said simply. "Because of Ethan." As if on cue, small footsteps sounded on the stairs. Ethan appeared, clutching his stuffed bear, his eyes wide. "Dad." The word hung in the air, pure and small, but powerful enough to silence everything else. Daniel turned, his throat tightening. "What did you say?" "Dad," Ethan repeated shyly. "Mom said you might be my dad." "Is that true?" Daniel knelt, his heart breaking open. "Yes, buddy. It is true." Ethan's face lit up, and he threw his arms around Daniel's neck. "I knew it," he said. Julia covered her mouth, tears filling her eyes as Daniel held the boy close, the storm outside giving way to sunlight breaking through the clouds. Hours later, the three of them sat on the porch as the world dried around them. The grass sparkled with drops of rain, and the sky stretched wide and blue. Julia leaned her head on Daniel's shoulder. What happens now? She asked. We build, he said. Something new. Something honest. You really think it is possible? She asked softly. I know it is, he said. Because for the first time in my life, I am not building it alone. Ethan ran into the yard, laughing as he chased the wind, his joy untainted by everything that had come before. Julia watched him, then looked at Daniel. He is happy, she said. He finally has what he always wanted. Daniel smiled. So. Do I? As the sun climbed higher, the house no longer looked like a place of hiding but of beginning. The ghosts of the past had not vanished, but they no longer ruled over them. Daniel knew the world outside would keep spinning with its noise, its greed, its hunger for power, but here, in this quiet corner, there was peace. And peace, he realized, was the greatest victory of all. Julia turned to him, her voice warm and sure. You know, someday he is going to ask how we met. What will you tell him? Daniel smiled faintly. I will tell him the truth, he said. That a man lost everything chasing the wrong kind of success, and then one day, fate brought him back to the only thing worth keeping. She nodded, her hand finding his. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of rain and earth. Daniel looked out over the hills, his heart steady for the first time in years. Whatever came next, he knew they would face it together. And somewhere deep inside, he could almost hear the faint echo of his old self fading into silence, leaving behind only the man he had finally become, a father, a partner, and a man who had learned that love, not power, was the truest measure of wealth.